True scary story animated. Do not watch alone. This is the true story of my family and how our dream home became the source of a nightmare we could never have imagined. It's a story about a beautiful house on a quiet street in Westfield, New Jersey, a place that was supposed to be our sanctuary. But we were wrong. We weren't the only ones watching the house. Someone else was watching us, and they called themselves The Watcher. This is a story that has baffled police and terrified a community. A story about an unsolved mystery that stole our family's future and replaced it with a paranoia that lingers to this day. We were haunted not by a ghost, but by a phantom made of paper and ink, a monster who remains a mystery. For my wife, Maria, and me, it was the culmination of a lifelong dream. In June 2014, we bought 657 Boulevard, a sprawling 6-bedroom Dutch colonial in Maria's idyllic hometown. The house, built in 1905, was everything we wanted, a place for our 3 young children to grow up, a symbol that our hard work had paid off. We paid over $1.3 million for it. It was our forever home. We didn't move in right away, choosing instead to begin extensive renovations to make the place truly ours. For a few weeks, everything was perfect. I would visit the house to check on the progress. Our kids would run through the empty rooms, their laughter echoing off the bare walls, picking out their future bedrooms. We were filled with hope and excitement. That feeling? It was the last time any of us would feel truly safe in that house. Section 1. The first letter. It happened just 3 days after we closed on the house. I had spent the evening painting, and before leaving, decided to check the mail out of habit. Inside, amongst the junk mail, was a single, crisp white envelope. It was addressed in thick, clunky handwriting, simply to the new owner. There was no return address. Thinking it was a welcome note from a neighbor, I didn't open it until I got home later that night. Surrounded by moving boxes, I slit the envelope open. Inside was a typed letter. I began to read it. Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. A friendly start. But the tone quickly changed. How did you end up here? The letter asked. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. A cold knot began to tighten in my stomach. This wasn't a welcome letter. This was something else entirely. The letter went on, disapproving of our renovations. TSK, bad move. You don't want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy. The writer knew about our contractors, even the model of our minivan. But it was the end of the letter that turned our blood to ice. The watcher mentioned our 3 children, referring to them as young blood. Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Maria and I were terrified. The letter writer knew we had children. We immediately called the police, who came and read the letter, advising us to be cautious and not to tell our neighbors, as any one of them could now be a suspect. That night, we contacted the previous owners, the Woods family, who admitted they'd received a single, odd letter just before moving out, but had thrown it away, thinking it was just a prank. For my family, this was only the beginning. Section 2. The escalation. Just 2 weeks later, a second letter arrived. This time, it was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Braddis, a misspelling that suggested the writer had only ever heard our names spoken aloud. This letter was far more personal and far more terrifying. The watcher now knew the names of our children, even referring to them by birth order, and their nicknames. Maria had been yelling out in the yard. I am pleased to know your names now, and the name of the young blood you have brought to me, the letter read. It mentioned one of our children using an easel on the porch, a detail that couldn't be easily seen from the street. The watcher wasn't just passing by. They were observing closely and constantly. "Who am I?" the letter continued. "I am the watcher and have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house." The dream of 657 Boulevard was curdling into a waking nightmare. We were so frightened, we never moved into the home. We stopped bringing our children there entirely. The police investigation stalled. They looked into neighbors, including one family who had lived next door since the 1960s, but found no evidence. DNA found on one of the envelopes suggested the sender might be a woman, but it didn't match anyone in any database. Every lead went cold. I became consumed by the case, installing cameras and spending hours watching the feeds, hoping to catch a glimpse of the person tormenting my family. I saw nothing. Our family was living in a state of constant fear, paying a mortgage on a home we were too terrified to occupy. Section 3. The breaking point. A third letter arrived. The watcher was growing impatient. "Where have you gone to?" it asked. 657 Boulevard is missing you." The voice of the writer was becoming unhinged, filled with a possessive rage. 657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in, it said. It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Greed is what brought you to me. The letter ended with chilling questions about the secrets hidden within the walls of the house. For Maria and me, this was the final straw. The direct and repeated references to our children as young blood was a threat we could no longer endure. The dream was dead. We had to sell the house. But who would buy a home that came with its own personal stalker? The decision to sell plunged our family into a new kind of hell. Once we listed the property, our private nightmare became a public spectacle, making international news. Some people in the town whispered that we had faked the letters ourselves, a hoax to escape a house we couldn't afford, an accusation that compounded our trauma. The house sat on the market for months, then years. We lowered the price again and again. At one point, we managed to rent the house out, but the tenants also received a threatening letter from the watcher and promptly left. Finally, in 2019, after 5 long years of torment, we sold the house. We took a staggering financial loss of over $400,000. The day we signed the final papers was not a relief. There was no joy, no sense of closure. The watcher had won. We had lost our dream, our savings, and our sense of security, all without ever spending a single night in our home. To this day, the identity of the watcher remains a mystery. Our case is one of New Jersey's most infamous unsolved crimes. Was it a jealous neighbor? Someone who lost a bidding war on the house? Or was it, as the letters claimed, a member of a family that had been watching 657 Boulevard for generations? We may never know. The new owners, who bought the house in 2019, have thankfully never received a letter. Perhaps the watcher finally moved on, or perhaps they're just biding their time, waiting. My family and I still live in Westfield, but in a different home, our lives forever marked by the faceless terror that ripped our American dream to shreds. Our story is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones you can't see. They're the ones who are just watching. My true scary story that still keeps me awake, story 2. I had a simple dream: get out of the city and find a quiet life in an old farmhouse. I'm talking mornings with coffee on the porch, the smell of damp earth after a good rain, and nights so quiet you could hear the stars. I spent years saving, years scrolling through listings, just picturing the life I was going to build. When I finally founded a 2-story colonial with peeling white paint and a wraparound porch, tucked away in the hills 2 hours from anywhere, I thought my dream was finally real. I bought it. I moved in. I took a deep breath of that country air and felt a peace I hadn't felt in a long, long time. What I got instead was a house that never slept. And now, neither do I. Section 1. The Dream and the Disquiet. The place was called Blackwood Farm. A little on the nose, I thought, for a house that stood like a forgotten monument on its 30 acres of wild land. The realtor, Carol, told me the original owners, the Hemlocks, built it in the late 1800s and lived there for generations before the family line just ended. The last one, a woman named Elara Hemlock, passed away in the house decades ago, and it had sat empty ever since. Carol tried to spin this as romantic, a house with history. I didn't mind. Old houses have a soul that new buildings just don't. They hold on to the lives that were lived there. That's what I wanted. The first week was bliss. I was tearing out rotted floorboards, scraping off layers of faded floral wallpaper, and just dreaming. The house groaned and settled around me, like old houses do. I learned its language pretty fast. The creak of the third step on the main staircase, the rattle of a loose window pane when the wind blew just right, the low groan of the pipes. These were the sounds of a house breathing, the sounds of home. I'd work all day, and at night I'd collapse into a dusty armchair, aching all over but happy, and listen to the crickets and the owls. It was perfect. The quiet was the whole point. I'm a writer, or I'm trying to be, and the city had completely choked my creativity. I needed silence to hear myself think. Blackwood Farm had that. My nearest neighbor was a mile down a dirt road. The only traffic was a tractor in a field far away. I remember the first night I finished a room, a small study off the living area. I painted the walls a deep, calming blue and sanded the original floors. I set up my desk facing a big window overlooking the untamed backyard. That evening, I sat down in my new office chair with my laptop and just felt this wave of satisfaction. This was it. My new life was starting. As the sun went down, I settled in to write. The house was quieter than I'd ever heard it. It was in that deep, heavy silence that I heard it for the first time. A whisper. It was so faint, I almost missed it. Like the ghost of a sound, a hiss that seemed to come from inside the walls. I stopped typing and just listened. Nothing. Just the hum of the fridge. I shook my head and smiled a little. My imagination was already running wild. An old isolated house, stories about the Hemlock family. It was the perfect setup for a ghost story. And my job is to make things up, right? I went back to work, but part of me was still listening. An hour went by. Then two. The moon was up, and the room got colder. Then I heard it again, clearer this time. A soft, long she. It came from the wall to my left, the one connecting the study to the main staircase. My heart did a little jump. I stood up and pressed my ear against the cool plaster. Old houses have drafts. Wind can make weird noises. That had to be it. I waited, holding my breath, but the sound was gone. I felt a little silly. Of course it was the wind. What else could it be? I was completely alone. The thought, which was a comfort just hours ago, now felt sharp. That night, lying on my mattress on the floor, I listened to the house in a whole new way. Every creak wasn't just the house settling anymore. Was that a footstep? Was that the wind? Or was it a whisper? I told myself I was being ridiculous, just tired from all the work. I was letting the spooky atmosphere get to me. I finally fell into a restless sleep, but a seed of fear had been planted. I didn't know it then, but in the fertile ground of Blackwood Farm, that seed was about to grow into a forest. Section 2. The escalation a few nights later, the whispers were back. I was in the kitchen washing dishes and heard it again. A soft, breathy sigh from the dining room. This time, I didn't brush it off. I dried my hands, grabbed the heavy cast iron skillet from the stove, I don't know, for protection, and crept toward the doorway. The dining room was empty, lit up by the pale moonlight. A thick layer of dust on the floor was completely undisturbed. If someone had been in there, I'd see tracks. I stood there, my heart pounding, and scanned the empty room. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding tiny. "Is someone there?" Silence. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the empty room. I tried to rationalize it. A raccoon in the walls? A stray cat? But the sound wasn't an animal. It had sounded human. It had sounded sad. The next week, things started to change. It wasn't just whispers and sighs anymore. It was getting personal. I started hearing my name. I'd be reading in the living room, and a faint, dry whisper would snake its way into my ear. Sarah. Always just my name, in a voice that sounded like rustling leaves. The first time, I dropped my book and whipped my head around. The room was empty. I was alone, but I heard it. I knew I did. Was I imagining this? Was the isolation finally getting to me? I started to question my sanity. I'd walk into a room and feel a sudden cold spot that would vanish as quickly as it appeared. I'd leave a room and come back to find a door slightly ajar that I swore I had closed. Small things. Things that don't mean anything on their own. But together, they started to paint a disturbing picture. I constantly felt like I was being watched. It was a physical weight on my shoulders, a prickling on the back of my neck. I'd spin around, expecting to see someone, but there was never anything. Just the empty, silent house. Then objects began to move. It started small, in the kitchen. I had a set of 3 antique ceramic canisters: flour, sugar, tea. I'd lined them up perfectly on the counter. One morning, I came downstairs to find the sugar canister moved about 6 inches to the left. I frowned, figuring I must have bumped it. I moved it back. The next morning, it was on the other side of the tea canister. My blood ran cold. I lived alone. No one else had a key. I checked every door and window. All locked. There was no explanation. I set the canister back, my hand shaking. That night, I decided to try a little experiment. Before bed, I took a picture of the canisters, all lined up. Then I sprinkled a fine layer of flour on the counter around them. If anything got in, it would leave tracks. I slept horribly. The moment I woke up, I rushed downstairs, my heart in my throat. I stopped in the kitchen doorway and just stared. The sugar canister wasn't on the counter at all. It was sitting in the middle of the kitchen table. I took a shaky breath and checked the counter. The flour was untouched. Not a single footprint, not a smudge. It was as if the canister had just floated to the table. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through my denial. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't my imagination. Something was happening in this house. The shadowy figures started appearing a few days later, always in the corner of my eye. A tall, dark shape darting past a doorway. A flicker of black in the reflection of a window. I told myself my tired eyes were playing tricks on me, but it kept happening. One evening, I was walking down the upstairs hallway to my bedroom. As I reached for my door, I saw it. At the far end of the hall, standing in the shadows by the staircase, was a figure. It was tall and unnaturally thin, a silhouette of pure black. No features, no face, just a human shape. It was completely still, just watching me. I froze. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run, but I was paralyzed by a terror so absolute it felt like I was being held down. I couldn't breathe. My heart felt like it was going to explode. We just stood there, me and the shadow at the end of the hall. The air got thick, heavy. Then, slowly, it just receded, melting back into the shadows until it was gone. The second it vanished, I could move again. I scrambled into my bedroom, slammed the door, and fumbled with the old skeleton key to lock it. I collapsed against the door, gasping, tears streaming down my face. This was real. I was being tormented by whatever was in this house. Was this Alara, the last hemlock, angry that I was in her home? I knew I needed to learn more about the house and the family who died here. The next day, I decided to explore the one place I hadn't touched, the attic. The door was a square panel in the ceiling of the very hallway where I'd seen the figure. I pulled the rope and a rickety wooden ladder unfolded. The air that hit me was thick and musty, the smell of trapped time, dust, and something else. Faintly sweet, like dried flowers. I climbed up, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the dark. The attic was huge. Scattered around were the forgotten pieces of the Hemlock family. Old furniture under white sheets looked like ghosts. Stacks of yellowed newspapers, a child's broken rocking horse, and several large, leather-bound trunks. It was in one of these trunks that I found it. The lock was rusted, but the leather was so brittle, I managed to pry it open. Inside, nestled among moth-eaten linens, was a small leather-bound diary. On the first page, in elegant script, was a name, Alara Hemlock, and a date, 1898. My hands trembled as I opened it. I sat down on the dusty floor and began to read, hoping for answers. I had no idea that the words on those pages would drag me even deeper into the nightmare. Section 3. The confrontation and the escape. The diary started out innocent. Alara wrote about life on the farm, the seasons, her dreams. I felt a strange connection to this woman who lived in my house a century before me. But as I read on, the tone shifted. The entries got shorter, more frantic. Her elegant handwriting became a jagged, hurried scrawl. She started writing about the whispers. She heard them in the walls, just like me. She wrote about her father, Silas Hemlock. She described him as a stern, quiet man who grew darker after her mother's death. He became withdrawn, locking himself in his study for hours, the very room I had made my office. October 12, 1899, she wrote. Father is not well. He speaks to the walls. He says Mother is still here. I hear the whispers too, but they are not Mother's voice. They are cold and cruel. They tell me to leave. A chill ran down my spine. The diary described how Silas became obsessed, believing he was the guardian of his ancestors' spirits within the house. He forbade Alara from leaving, telling her the house needed their family. The most terrifying entry was dated November 1st, 1899. He's gone mad. He came to my room last night. His eyes were not his own. He said the house demanded a sacrifice. He said the walls were hungry. He raised his hand to me, and I saw a shadow standing behind him in the hallway. A tall, thin shadow. It was not a spirit of our family. It was something else, something older and darker. I am a prisoner. I fear I will never leave this house alive. That was the last entry. The rest of the pages were blank. I slammed the diary shut. It wasn't Alara haunting the house. It was him, Silas, and whatever dark thing he had let in. The shadow figure I saw, Alara saw it too. Suddenly, the attic felt suffocating. The air grew heavy, and my flashlight started to flicker. And then I heard it. Not a whisper, but a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the beams above my head. A sound of pure hatred. Get out. The voice was a roar that filled the attic, a sound so powerful it felt like a physical punch. It was a man's voice, raspy and cruel. Silas. I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled backwards as my flashlight died, plunging me into total darkness. Panic seized me. I could hear something moving in the dark, a heavy, dragging sound coming towards me. I screamed. I turned and scrambled on my hands and knees toward the faint square of light that marked the attic opening. I could feel its presence behind me, a wave of freezing cold and pure hate. I practically fell down the ladder, landing hard on the hallway floor. I pushed the ladder back up and slammed the panel shut. I didn't wait. I ran. I fled down the stairs, the whispers now a chorus of angry, hissing voices from every direction. I could feel cold spots brushing against my skin, like phantom hands reaching for me. I ran for the front door, fumbling with the deadbolt, my fingers clumsy and shaking. The lock was stiff. It wouldn't turn. Behind me, I heard a loud crash from upstairs. Then heavy, deliberate footsteps started coming down the main staircase. Thump, thump, thump. Tears of terror streamed down my face. "Please," I whimpered, wrestling with the lock. "Please, just open." The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. I could feel it right behind me. I didn't dare turn around. I could feel its cold breath on the back of my neck. Then a voice, no longer a roar but a close, intimate whisper, spoke directly into my ear. "You are not leaving. This is my house." An icy cold washed over me, and something grabbed my shoulder. It wasn't a hand, but a grip of pure paralyzing cold that burned through my shirt. I screamed and, with a final surge of adrenaline, twisted the deadbolt. It clicked open. I threw the door open and launched myself into the night. I ran across the porch, vaulted over the railing, and just kept running. Down the long dirt driveway, my bare feet cut up by the gravel. The whispers followed me on the wind, but they grew fainter the farther I got from the house. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, a mile away. I stood there, shaking, and looked back at my dream house. It was a dark silhouette on the hill. A single light was on in an upstairs window, my bedroom window, and in that window I could just make out the shape of a tall, thin figure standing perfectly still, watching me. Section 4. The lingering fear. I never went back. I couldn't. I left everything: my clothes, my books, my laptop. None of it mattered. I spent that night in a cheap motel. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the bed and stared at the wall until morning. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadow in the hall. I heard the roar in the attic. I felt the icy grip on my shoulder. The next day, I called the realtor, Carol. I tried to explain, but the words sounded insane. Whispers, moving objects, a diary from 1899. She listened, probably thinking I was having a breakdown. She offered to call a doctor. I just told her to sell the house. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted my name off the deed. I moved back to the city and crashed on a friend's couch. I couldn't be alone. The city noises I ran from were now a comfort. The traffic, the sirens. They were a buffer against the terrifying silence where the whispers lived. But the fear followed me. It's a different kind of fear now. It's the slow, creeping dread that lives in the quiet moments. It's why I can't sleep without a TV on. It's why my heart jumps when a floorboard creaks. I learned that some houses aren't just wood and nails. They're vessels. They hold on to things. The tragedy of the Hemlock family had left a wound in that place, and it had festered into something monstrous. I still have nightmares. I'm always back at the farm, trapped in the attic, or standing at the end of the driveway while the shadow of Silas Hemlock stands on the porch, beckoning me home. I always wake up in a cold sweat, the ghost of his whisper in my ear. This is my house. My dream of a quiet life is dead. I found the quiet I was looking for, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the watchful silence of a predator. You can leave a haunted house, but that doesn't mean you escape. The real ghosts are the memories and the fears that follow you. They become a part of you. They whisper to you in the dead of night, not from the walls of a house, but from the haunted corridors of your own mind. And that is why this story still keeps me awake. My Alone at Night horror story. Story 3. I have just settled in for a quiet night of house-sitting in what was supposed to be an empty home. Seemed like the perfect easy gig. But a faint sound from the basement, a sound I could unpossibly be hearing, was the first sign that I was not alone, and that this would be the most terrifying night of my life. It's amazing what you'll do for easy money. When my friend Chloe told me her aunt and uncle, the Hendersons, needed someone to watch their house for a long weekend, I didn't even hesitate. A quiet house in the suburbs, a full fridge, and a hefty paycheck? It sounded less like a job and more like a paid vacation. I couldn't have been more wrong. The $500 they offered was more than enough to cover my overdue car payment, with plenty left over. My life at that point was just one financial mess after another, and this felt like a lifeline. I'd never met the Hendersons, but Chloe swore they were nice, if a little eccentric. They're history professors, she'd said. Their house is like a museum, just ... Be respectful of their stuff. Respectful, I could do. Quiet, I could do. It was just a house. An empty house. Section 1. Exposition. The drive out to their neighborhood was nice. Autumn was in full swing, and the trees were a riot of orange and red. The houses got bigger and farther apart the deeper I drove until my GPS announced I'd arrived. The Henderson house was perched on a huge wooded lot at the end of a long gravel driveway. It was an old Victorian kind, with a wraparound porch, a pointed turret, and way too many windows. It was beautiful, but in the fading afternoon light, it also looked kind of imposing, like it was watching me. Mrs. Henderson met me at the door. She was a tall, thin woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that didn't seem to miss a thing. Her smile was quick and tight. "You must be Alex," she said, her voice crisp. "Chloe speaks highly of you." She led me inside, and I immediately saw what Chloe meant. The house was a museum. Dark wood paneling, oil paintings of stern-looking ancestors, and antique furniture everywhere, some of it draped in dust sheets. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, lemon polish, and something else, kind of like dried flowers. She gave me the lightning-fast tour. TV is straightforward. WiFi's on the fridge. Help yourself to anything, within reason. We have a cat, Persephone, but you probably won't see her. She's shy. She pointed out the essentials, then paused, her hand on a heavy dark wood door in the main hall. It was secured with a big iron bolt lock. "This is the basement door," she said, her tone suddenly serious. "It stays locked. There's nothing down there for you. The foundation is having work done. It's a mess. Just, please, stay out of the basement." It seemed like a weird thing to stress so much, but I just nodded. Rich people have their quirks. I wasn't about to argue. "Of course, no problem," I said with an easy smile. Mr. Henderson popped out then, a shorter, rounder man, whose warm handshake was the complete opposite of his wife's cool vibe. They gave me a few more instructions, emergency numbers, and then they were gone. The sound of their car crunching down the driveway faded, and a deep, profound silence fell over the house. For the first time, I was truly alone. And the sheer size of the place started to settle in. Every room felt like it was holding its breath. I walked through the downstairs, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood. I peeked into a formal dining room and a stuffy sitting room that felt more for show than for living. I decided to set up camp in the den, the one room that looked like it had been updated this century, with a comfy sofa and a big flat screen. I ordered a pizza, unpacked my bag, and tried to settle in. I found Persephone's food bowls in the kitchen, both full. The house was unnervingly quiet. I know old houses make noises, groans, creaks, the wind, but this house was tomb silent. It felt like it just absorbed sound. Even the TV seemed muffled. I texted Chloe, "Made it. Your aunt and uncle have a crypt, not a house, but the money's good." She sent back a laughing emoji. "Told you. Just don't break anything priceless." I ate on the couch watching some dumb sitcom, trying to inject a little normalcy into the giant space. The sun was long gone, and the world outside the windows was just a deep, impenetrable black. The beautiful trees from earlier now looked like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. I made a point of going around and drawing all the curtains, shutting out the darkness. I checked the front door, the back door, everything locked. I was safe. It was just a big, old, quiet, empty house. Section 2. Inciting incident. A few hours passed. I was starting to relax, my eyelids getting heavy, and then I heard it. It was faint. So faint, I thought I'd imagined it. I paused the TV, and the sudden silence rang in my ears. I held my breath, straining. Hee hee hee. It was a child's laughter. My blood ran cold. It was distant, like it was coming from deep inside the house. It was a light, airy sound, genuine, happy laughter. And it was absolutely impossible. I shot bolt upright on the couch, my heart hammering. My mind raced for an explanation. A TV left on in another room? I got up, my body stiff with a sudden, primal fear, and walked through the downstairs. I checked every single room. The formal living room, the dining room, the kitchen, the small office. All dark, silent, empty. No other TVs, no radios, nothing. I stood in the main hallway, with its dark paneling and grim portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me. The house was dead silent again. Did I fall asleep and dream it? It felt so real, so distinct. It's possible, I told myself. I was tired. It was a creepy old house. My imagination was running wild. Houses make noises, but laughter isn't a noise a house makes. I tried to shake it off. I went back to the den, unpaused the show, and cranked the volume up, a flimsy shield against the suffocating quiet. I tried to focus on the screen, on the bright colors and canned laughter, a world away from the dread coiling in my stomach. But I couldn't focus. My ears were on high alert, listening for that impossible sound again. 10 minutes passed. 20. Nothing but silence. My heartbeat slowly returned to normal. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I was holding. It had to be my imagination. Stress, sleep deprivation, a new environment, the perfect recipe for an auditory hallucination. I felt a little foolish. Of course, there wasn't a child laughing. The Hendersons were gone. The house was empty. I was about to dismiss it for good when I heard it again. Hee-hee-a-boo. It was clearer this time, closer, and it was definitely coming from the main hallway. It sounded like a kid playing peekaboo. My breath caught in my throat. This was not my imagination. This was real. Something was in the house with me, and it was downstairs. Section 3. Rising Action, Part 1. Panic is a cold, sharp thing. It cut right through my attempts to rationalize and just took over. Someone was in the house, but how? I'd locked all the doors. The windows were shut. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling. My first instinct was to call 911. But what would I say? I hear a kid laughing, but no one's here? They'd think I was drunk or crazy. My thumb hovered over the call button. I had to be sure. I had to investigate. It was a stupid idea, the classic horror movie mistake, but I had to know what I was dealing with. Maybe a neighbor's kid got in before I locked up. It seemed impossible, but it was the only rational thought my terrified brain could cling to. Armed with my phone's flashlight and a heavy, brass fire poker from the den, I crept into the hall. The air felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. The long hallway stretched out like a tunnel of shadows. The portraits on the wall watched me go, their expressions cold and judging. Hello? I called out, my voice a pathetic wobble. Is someone there? Only silence answered. This isn't funny. I tried again, trying to sound forceful and failing completely. I'm calling the police. Nothing. I moved slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. I swept the flashlight beam across the living room and dining room, lighting up dust sheet-draped furniture. Empty. I checked the kitchen again, yanking open the pantry door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the poker. Empty. The only place left to check was the source of my terror, the hallway itself. The sound had come from right near that ominous bolted basement door. As my flashlight beam hit it, I saw something that made the hair on my arms stand straight up. On the floor, right in front of the basement door, was a single small object that I swear had not been there before. It was a little wooden toy soldier, painted with a bright red coat and a tall black hat. It was old, the paint chipped and faded. It was lying on its side, like a kid had just dropped it. I hadn't seen it on the tour with Mrs. Henderson. I hadn't seen it when I walked through the hall earlier. It was just there, placed there, for me to find. I stared at it, holding the fire poker out like a shield. Where did it come from? I refused to get any closer, my eyes glued to the dark basement door behind it. Mrs. Henderson's words rang in my ears. "It stays locked. Please stay out of the basement." Her seriousness suddenly felt less like a quirk and more like a dire warning. And then I heard it again. Not laughter this time. A whisper. It was so soft, like rustling leaves, but it was a voice, and it came from the door, from the other side. "Come play with me." Section 4. Rising Action. Part 2. I didn't scream. The sound was stuck in my throat, choked off by pure terror. I scrambled backward, tripping over my own feet, and the fire poker clattered loudly on the hardwood floor. I didn't stop to get it. I just fled. I ran back to the den, slammed the door, and fumbled with the pathetic little lock on the knob. I grunted and shoved the heavy sofa, scraping it across the floor until it was wedged against the door. I was trapped, but at least I was barricaded in. For now. My breath came in ragged, panicked gasps. I was hyperventilating. I slid down the wall and tried to force myself to think. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a neighbor's kid. There was something in this house. It was in the basement, and it was talking to me. I snatched my phone, my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to type a coherent message to Chloe. "Call me now. Emergency. Something is in the house." I stared at the screen, waiting for the little dots to appear. Seconds felt like an eternity. My eyes kept darting to the barricaded door, expecting it to just splinter open. Finally, my phone buzzed. Chloe. I answered on the first ring. "Alex, what is going on?" "You're freaking me out." Her voice was a lifeline. "Chloe," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "There's someone here." I heard a kid laughing, then whispering. "It's coming from the basement." There was a pause. "Alex, what are you talking about?" "That's not possible. The house is empty." "I'm not imagining it, Chloe. There was a toy soldier in front of the basement door." The voice. It asked me to play with it. The words just tumbled out in a jumble. I heard her take a deep breath. Okay, calm down. My aunt and uncle, they never said anything. There are no kids in that house. There haven't been for ever. Then, what am I hearing? I pleaded, tears of fear and frustration starting to well up. "Old houses make weird noises," she said, trying to be soothing, but it just made me angry. It's what I'd already told myself. "The pipes, the wind." "You're just spooked." "It's not the pipes, Chloe," I hissed. "Pipes don't leave toys on the floor and whisper to me." I tried to shake it off. I went back to the den, unpaused the show, and cranked the volume up, a flimsy shield against the suffocating quiet. I tried to focus on the screen, on the bright colors and canned laughter, a world away from the dread coiling in my stomach. But I couldn't focus. My ears were on high alert, listening for that impossible sound again. 10 minutes passed. 20. Nothing but silence. My heartbeat slowly returned to normal. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I was holding. It had to be my imagination. Stress, sleep deprivation, a new environment, the perfect recipe for an auditory hallucination. I felt a little foolish. Of course, there wasn't a child laughing. The Hendersons were gone. The house was empty. I was about to dismiss it for good when I heard it again. Hee, a boo. It was clearer this time. Closer. And it was definitely coming from the main hallway. It sounded like a kid playing peekaboo. My breath caught in my throat. This was not my imagination. This was real. Something was in the house with me, and it was downstairs. Section 3. Rising Action. Part 1. Panic is a cold, sharp thing. It cut right through my attempts to rationalize and just took over. Someone was in the house. But how? I'd locked all the doors. The windows were shut. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling. My first instinct was to call 911. But what would I say? I hear a kid laughing, but no one's here. They'd think I was drunk or crazy. My thumb hovered over the call button. I had to be sure. I had to investigate. It was a stupid idea, the classic horror movie mistake. But I had to know what I was dealing with. Maybe a neighbor's kid got in before I locked up. It seemed impossible, but it was the only rational thought my terrified brain could cling to. Armed with my phone's flashlight and a heavy brass fire poker from the den, I crept into the hall. The air felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. The long hallway stretched out like a tunnel of shadows. The portraits on the wall watched me go, their expressions cold and judging. Hello? I called out, my voice a pathetic wobble. Is someone there? Only silence answered. This isn't funny, I tried again, trying to sound forceful and failing completely. I'm calling the police. Nothing. I moved slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. I swept the flashlight beam across the living room and dining room, lighting up dust sheet-draped furniture. Empty. I checked the kitchen again, yanking open the pantry door, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the poker. Empty. The only place left to check was the source of my terror, the hallway itself. The sound had come from right near that ominous bolted basement door. As my flashlight beam hit it, I saw something that made the hair on my arms stand straight up. On the floor, right in front of the basement door, was a single small object that I swear had not been there before. It was a little wooden toy soldier, painted with a bright red coat and a tall black hat. It was old, the paint chipped and faded. It was lying on its side, like a kid had just dropped it. I hadn't seen it on the tour with Mrs. Henderson. I hadn't seen it when I walked through the hall earlier. It was just there, placed there, for me to find. I stared at it, holding the fire poker out like a shield. Where did it come from? I refused to get any closer, my eyes glued to the dark basement door behind it. Mrs. Henderson's words rang in my ears. It stays locked. Please, stay out of the basement. Her seriousness suddenly felt less like a quirk and more like a dire warning. And then I heard it again. Not laughter this time. A whisper. It was so soft, like rustling leaves, but it was a voice. And it came from the door. From the other side. Come play with me. Section 4. Rising Action, Part 2. I didn't scream. The sound was stuck in my throat, choked off by pure terror. I scrambled backward, tripping over my own feet, and the fire poker clattered loudly on the hardwood floor. I didn't stop to get it. I just fled. I ran back to the den, slammed the door, and fumbled with the pathetic little lock on the knob. I grunted and shoved the heavy sofa, scraping it across the floor until it was wedged against the door. I was trapped, but at least I was barricaded in. For now, my breath came in ragged, panicked gasps. I was hyperventilating. I slid down the wall and tried to force myself to think. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a neighbor's kid. There was something in this house. It was in the basement, and it was talking to me. I snatched my phone, my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to type a coherent message to Chloe. Call me now. Emergency. Something is in the house. I stared at the screen, waiting for the little dots to appear. Seconds felt like an eternity. My eyes kept darting to the barricaded door, expecting it to just splinter open. Finally, my phone buzzed. Chloe. I answered on the first ring. Alex? What is going on? You're freaking me out. Her voice was a lifeline. Chloe, I whispered, my voice hoarse. There's someone here. I heard a kid laughing, then whispering. It's coming from the basement. There was a pause. Alex, what are you talking about? That's not possible. The house is empty. I'm not imagining it, Chloe. There was a toy soldier in front of the basement door. The voice. It asked me to play with it. The words just tumbled out in a jumble. I heard her take a deep breath. Okay, calm down. My aunt and uncle. They never said anything. There are no kids in that house. There haven't been 4. Ever. Then what am I hearing? I pleaded, tears of fear and frustration starting to well up. Old houses make weird noises, she said, trying to be soothing, but it just made me angry. It's what I'd already told myself. The pipes, the wind. You're just spooked. It's not the pipes, Chloe. I hissed. Pipes don't leave toys on the floor and whisper to me. She sighed. Look, I'm sure it's nothing. Just lock yourself in a room and try to get some sleep. I'll call you in the morning. Everything will be fine. Don't hang up, I begged. Alex, I'm at a party. I can barely hear you. You're safe. Just stay put. Call the cops if you're really that scared. And before I could argue, she said, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And the line went dead. Alone again. Truly alone. Nobody believed me. I stayed on the floor, huddled in the corner, for what felt like hours. The silence from outside the door was somehow worse than the noises. It was a waiting, patient silence. I strained my ears for any sound at all. After a long time, the adrenaline faded, replaced by a deep exhaustion. My eyes burned. Maybe Chloe was right. Maybe I was just overtired. But the image of that little toy soldier was burned into my mind. That's when I heard a new sound. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was coming from the door. The barricaded door. A slow, deliberate scratching, like a small animal, or a child's fingernails dragging down the wood. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was rhythmic, hypnotic. And then a new sound joined it. A soft, melodic humming. It was a nursery rhyme, one I knew but couldn't name. The tune was sweet, but in this context, it was the most horrifying sound I'd ever heard. The humming grew louder, and it was joined by a soft, rhythmic thump, thump, thump against the door. I realized with a fresh wave of horror what it was. The sound of a small ball being bounced against the wood. A child, humming a nursery rhyme, was bouncing a ball against the other side of a door I had blocked with a 200-pound sofa. The sound should have been muffled, but it was crystal clear, like the door and the sofa weren't even there. Like it was right inside the room with me. Section 5. Rising Action, Part 3. My sanity just snapped. This was way beyond my mind playing tricks on me. This was a targeted, psychological assault. Every instinct screamed at me. Get out, not just out of the room. Out of the house. The $500 didn't matter anymore. The scratching stopped. The bouncing stopped. The humming faded. For a split second, I hoped it was over. Then, a new sound turned my blood to ice. The shriek of metal scraping against metal. It was the bolt on the basement door being drawn back. I couldn't stay in that room. It was a trap. The only way out was through the hall, right past that basement door. Impossible. I frantically scanned the room for another exit. The window. A large, crank-style window that looked out onto the porch. It was my only shot. With a surge of desperate energy, I scrambled over to it. I twisted the old latch and started turning the crank, which groaned in protest. It was agonizingly slow. Inch by inch, the window opened. The cool night air, smelling of damp earth, rushed in. It was the smell of freedom. Behind me, I heard a soft creak from the den door. My head snapped around. The door, despite the sofa, was slowly swinging inward. The sofa wasn't moving. The door was passing right through it, its solid form turning transparent where it touched the furniture. And in the dark opening, for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw the silhouette of a small child standing there before it was gone. I didn't wait to see more. I threw myself at the window, cranking with all my might until the opening was just wide enough. I squeezed through, scraping my side, and tumbled onto the porch, landing hard on my shoulder. I was out of the room, but I wasn't out of the house. I scrambled to my feet, my socks slipping on the damp wood. The porch wrapped all the way around. The front door was at the far end, a mile away. As I started to run, a light flickered on in the second-floor turret room. A warm, yellow light. And then the laughter started again. But this time, it wasn't faint. It wasn't distant. It was everywhere. It echoed from the woods, from the roof, from inside the walls themselves. A chorus of a dozen children laughing, playing, a deafening, maddening cacophony that was inside my head. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it did nothing. I ran. I sprinted along the porch, past the dark, curtained windows. As I passed each one, a light flickered on inside, one by one. Dining room, living room, entryway, a trail of lights marking my desperate flight. I rounded the final corner and saw it. The front door. Freedom. My lungs burned, but I pushed myself forward. I was almost there. That's when I heard the humming again. That sweet, terrible nursery rhyme. But it wasn't coming from inside the house anymore. It was right behind me. I did not look back. I knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that if I turned, I would see it, and that would be the end of me. The humming was so close I could almost feel cold breath on my neck. I lunged for the front door, my hand closing around the heavy brass knob. For one heart-stopping second, I thought it was locked. I twisted with all my weight. The latch clicked, and the door swung open. I burst out into the night, not stopping to close it. I ran across the lawn, my bare feet stinging on the cold, damp grass and gravel. The wave of laughter poured out of the open doorway behind me, a tide of spectral glee. My car was at the end of the long driveway, a beautiful promise of escape. I fumbled in my pocket for my keys, my fingers feeling like clumsy, frozen sausages. I couldn't find them. Panic flared. I slapped at my pockets, jeans, back pocket, there. I finally got the key in the lock, and the car's unlocked chime was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I wrenched the door open and threw myself inside, sprawling across the passenger seat before slamming the door and hammering the lock button down. Safe. I was in my car. Metal, plastic, real. Safe. I scrambled into the driver's seat, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I jammed the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse and stomped on the gas. The tires spun on the gravel before catching, shooting the car backward down the driveway. As I straightened out and shifted to drive, my headlights swept across the front of the house. And I saw him. For one single, terrifying second, standing on the porch, bathed in the light from the open door, was a small boy. No more than 6 or 7. He was wearing old-fashioned clothes knickerbockers and a little button-up shirt. In his hand, he held a small red ball. His face was pale and serious, his eyes 2 dark, empty pools in the glare of my headlights. He just stood there, watching me. He gave the ball a single soft bounce on the porch. Thump. And he raised his other hand and gave a small, slow wave goodbye. I screamed a raw animal sound. I cranked the wheel and stomped on the accelerator. The car shot forward onto the road. I didn't slow down. I drove with a blind, desperate speed, refusing to look in the rearview mirror. I knew if I looked, I'd see him still standing there, waving. Or worse, I'd see him in my backseat, his dark eyes reflected in the mirror, finally smiling. The laughter faded as I put miles between me and that house, but the sound was seared into my brain. The image of that pale little boy, waving goodbye from that godforsaken porch, would be with me forever. Section 7. Falling action? I drove for nearly an hour, knuckles white on the steering wheel, before flashing red and blue lights appeared in my mirror. I pulled over, my body trembling with leftover terror. The officer was cautious. He probably saw the wild look in my eyes. "Ma'am, do you know how fast you were going?" The words just spilled out. I told him everything. The house sitting, the laughter, the whisper, the toy, the boy on the porch. I knew I sounded completely insane. He listened patiently. "You've had a rough night, ma'am," he said, his voice gentle. "Why don't you follow me to the station? We'll get you some coffee and have a patrol car check the residence." I agreed. I had nowhere else to go. At the station, they treated me with a kind of gentle skepticism. I called the Hendersons again, straight to voicemail. I woke Chloe up and told her the rest. She was quiet for a long time. "Oh my God, Alex, I'm so sorry. I thought you were just spooked." An hour later, the officer came back. "Well, ma'am," he sighed. "The patrol car just cleared the scene. We checked the house. All doors and windows are locked up tight. No sign of forced entry. No one inside." He paused. "The sofa in the den is where it should be, and the basement door is bolted shut. Nothing's out of place." "The toy soldier?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "In the hall?" He shook his head. "Nothing, ma'am. The place is clean and quiet." I just stared at him. They thought I was crazy or on drugs. They let me go with a warning. I didn't go back to my apartment. I couldn't be alone. I drove to Chloe's and crashed on her couch with all the lights on. Conclusion: Mrs. Henderson finally called me back the next afternoon. Her voice was strained. I told her what happened, leaving nothing out. When I finished, there was a long, heavy silence on the line. I heard her take a shaky breath. "Alex," she said, her voice low and filled with a sorrow so deep it chilled me to my core. "We are so sorry. We should have told you we didn't think." It had been so long since he interacted with anyone. "He?" I asked. "Our son," she whispered. "Our son, Thomas. He died in the house when he was 7, a long time ago. He just wants to play." She said they were cutting their trip short. She asked for my address and said she would mail me a check for $1,000. Not just payment. It was an apology. It was hush money. I never saw them again. I never went back to that house. But sometimes, late at night, when my own apartment is quiet, I'll hear something. A faint sound right on the edge of my hearing. He. And I know Thomas is still waiting. He's just waiting for someone new to come play.